The government has outlined its gas reservation scheme for the East Coast. The scheme will start in 2027, but it'll apply to all new contracts entered into from today. Gas producers will have to reserve at least 15% of extracted gas for domestic use in an effort to put downward pressure on prices. Tony Wood from the Energy Program at the Grattan Institute says this scheme won't stop all gas from heading overseas.
The East Coast market, particularly the domestic market, is much bigger than the West Coast, and the way this thing is designed to operate is also tricky because it's being introduced at a time when we've already got a series of policies. Long-term contracts have been there for 10, 15, 20 years almost, and so it's got the dynamics are quite different, but the fundamental principle that says we need to reserve a certain proportion or a certain amount of gas for the domestic market is exactly the same.
And the big question, of course, is will this bring down prices? And we'll come to that in just a moment. But tell us where prices are at right now and how much of it we do export.
Well, look, I think to be able to talk about price, we have to use some numbers. And forgive me for quoting numbers, I'll try and put them in context. And that is that we buy gas by the gigajoule. A gigajoule is an amount of energy. A typical Melbourne home with heating, cooking and hot water would use 70 gigajoules a year, maybe 60. A typical Queensland home using gas for cooking would use less than 10. So for households, it is modest and maybe important in Victoria, but not really noticeable in Queensland, and other states like New South Wales would be in between. For large industrial users, they would be using thousands of gigajoules a year. Now, the price of gas has been as low as $4 or $5 a gigajoule. That's the wholesale price, not what you and I pay for it, delivered to our homes, about $4 or $5. Now it's around 12 to 15. That's a lot more expensive. It was as high as 30. And the hope is that this might bring that price down by at least a couple of dollars a gigajoule, maybe between 10 and 20%. That's the sort of number I think we're talking about.
And so by forcing gas producers to reserve supplies for us here in Australia, will it bring down prices? When would that be likely to happen, and to what extent must it do so to be considered a successful scheme here?
Well, I think this is one of those ones where success will be in the eye of the beholder, that's for sure. Whether you're a producer or a buyer of gas. The real test is firstly making sure the domestic market is supplied. The second one is that I think is important is that what we don't want to do is unintentionally give people a reason to continue to burn a whole lot of gas when we know that gas is a fossil fuel and we need to be getting off gas. That's why this is a really tricky position for the government to be in, because we want to do both more or less at the same time. We don't want to run out of gas and have people freezing in their homes, for example, in the most extreme case. On the other hand, we don't want to find ourselves still using gas at the same level in 2040 or 2050 as we do today. So the real test in the short term is going to be, have we made sure the domestic market has been supplied with gas, and have the producers and the buyers more or less been happy with the outcome? Now, that's a very vague concept because both of them will have very different views of what price they need, and both of them have been shouting very loudly at the government and in public about what they think the price should be and what they would accept as a acceptable intervention by the government. This sort of mechanism is probably in the territory that most of them have been expecting already. The big question is going to be what it looks like over the next 6 months as they work it through, because it's not going to apply until new contracts are entered into, and that's going to be after 2030.
The Energy Minister said new gas fields will be needed. Is that fair?
I think that we are certainly in a situation where two things are going on. One is we are running out of gas in Victoria. We've got two ways of getting gas into Victoria. One is gas within the state of Victoria or close onshore or close offshore, and we haven't seen a lot of gas being developed in that sense. And so the idea, alternatively, is to transport gas from the northern states, particularly Queensland or even the Northern Territory, into Victoria. We currently have some pipeline capacity to do that, but it's not enough, or it won't be enough as the current supply in Victoria runs out as it is. So the question is going to be, how do we get gas into Victoria? And it's not obvious that this policy by itself is going to solve that problem. But new gas in Victoria would help. No one expects it's going to solve that problem. At the same time, in the longer term, those gas fields in Queensland themselves will start to face a potential long-term shortages, whether or not a new existing gas producer, such as one of the big three producers in Queensland today, whether they would enter into any new 20-year contracts after the current contracts run out, is an open question, because it might be they don't see they've got enough gas to do that. Now, that's what got us, to some extent, into this problem in the first place. At least one of those LNG exporters entered into contracts to meet export contracts that didn't have enough gas in their new developing fields to supply, and therefore they sucked gas out of the domestic market, and we don't want to see that happen again.
Tony Wood, Senior Fellow of the Energy Program at the Grattan Institute. Thanks for speaking with us.
Thanks, Jim.